thanks everybody for coming. You have an assortment of Redgate product managers today, of which I'm the one that gets neglected at the bottom of the assortment. I don't know. My name's Colin. I'm product manager at Redgate. I'm joined by a pair of Davids. Obviously, the collective noun for product managers and assortment. I'm not sure what is this, a brace? Of product managers. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're actively working on, some of the things that we're actively researching, to give you some insight into what might be coming down the release pipe for deployment manager at some stage in the future. It's obviously a more intimate group than the last setting, although we've got feedback forms and we would love to get you to do some ticking as you go and giving your views and comments as you go. Please don't wait to the end. If you want to share an observation, a comment, if it's we love that or we hate that. We love both of those types of feedback. There's nothing worse than not having a reality check. So please, positive, negative feedback, very, very valuable. Please put your hands up, interact with us, grab us at the end, give us the feedback as and when we go. What's the point of not having a clicker?
Yeah, I think you'll either need to use the mic or put the clip on them. Is that?
Yeah, the wireless.
Okay, it will. So it'll be intimate but with a booming echo. Is that okay? There's a little green light saying on. Oh, I've got a, okay. Okay, so we're going to go through 5 different areas. This is not the complete list of things we're working on, but are ones that we thought were suitable for discussion today. We'll start off with a piece of work that we're doing around SQL Backup, and then go on through the rest of them. I'm going to talk to SQL Backup, and then I'm going to hand over. Before we go any further, can I ask for a quick show of hands? Who here thinks they're primarily a developer? Okay, and who here is primarily a database administrator? And is there somebody who hasn't put their hand up so far? Identity crisis, consultant, scary DBA. Okay, great, thank you. SQL Backup Pro. Who's already aware? Well, who's already a user? Anybody actually a user of SQL Backup Pro? Great, couple of users. If you're not familiar with it, we've had it for quite a long time at Redgate. It's a pretty mature product. It gives you backup compression, backup encryption, centralized management, sort of data retention, data purging, some other capabilities that we've introduced over the years that we've been working on it. But its scope is very much managing the backups to the point of generation of data that is put on site for you to do something else with it. And at that point, we don't really help with any of the other potential pain points that you might encounter around the data that's then generated. So I'd be interested just to get a feel. I'm going to go through these one by one and ask you, can you have a quick scan through them? I'll go through them one by one. Put your hand up when I sort of get to them if it's the most painful aspect of what you then do with the backup data. So for whom is actually the process of getting the data back from tape, the process of raising tickets a significant issue? We've got somebody for whom it is. For somebody, is there who here has the problem around actually managing the tapes themselves, switch them over? For whom is that a big problem for anybody? Keeping track of where the backups are, where they are on tapes, is that causing anybody much grief? Maybe a nodding. The actual retention policies themselves. Does anybody have to do object of recovery and find that a nuisance? Okay, we've got a few hands up there. Good. And is there anything that we're sort of significantly missing here that you would shout out if there's something around this part of the process managing this data? Right, coordination. Because it's not you, it's another part of the organization. Yeah. Okay, so it's coordination, but in your case, because it's a number of different customers. Okay. So maybe it's worth just reflecting on why we take backups. We don't take backups because it's fun. We take them for a reason. The primary reason we take backups is, for most of us, is for disaster recovery, to protect ourselves. But people often take backups for other reasons, like they need it to support object-level recovery activities, to refresh different environments, whether they're staging, development, or reporting environments. And as I said, the scope of SQL Backup to date has very much been around creating the backup data and managing on-premise. And we've done a little bit to help beyond just the raw extraction of the data from SQL Server and the compression encryption. We've put in things like network resilience. We've put in some of the data retention things I've talked about already, so letting you purge old backups. But we're looking to take a next step and to try to take advantage of some technologies that we've got and the emergence of cloud as a credible place for people to store their backups. Be interested to see who thinks cloud is a credible place to store SQL Server backups, but maybe we'll come on to that. So what have we done? So we've only been working on this a couple of months, but this isn't a major overhaul to SQL Backup. We've basically created a location we've created a storage account on S3, on Amazon S3, and we've created some stored procedures that will trigger a backup and then upload them to our storage account. But they upload them to your area of our storage account. I'll give a quick demo. I'll try to do a live demo, which is always fun, to show you what we're talking about here. So let me come in. Here I've logged into the cloud storage account that Redgate is now going to be offering. And I can see the backups that I've previously taken. As you can see, I made sure it worked today by taking a backup earlier today of the widget dev database. And if you're a user of SQL Backup, you may well recognize this sort of file naming convention, the type of the backup, the name of the server, the name of the database, and a date timestamp. So that's sitting up there in the cloud right now. How did I get it up there? So right now, this isn't fully integrated into SQL Backup in the user interface. But if you're familiar with SQL Backup, you'll know that the way it works is it uses a store procedure interface. Let me just try to zoom this so you can see a bit easier. Maybe that's not helping. So it executes a store procedure, which is normally called SQL Backup. And here you can see we've got a slight variant to that store procedure. So the syntax that we're looking at here is actually the normal syntax that we use with SQL Backup. It specifies the type of backup, the database, where the backup file is put, the naming capabilities. But we've got two extra things here, which are basically the credentials for my account that we've got set up. So if I run a backup now, oh, hang on, let's reconnect. What's going on there? Okay. So that's executing away, creating a backup file, and then at the end of the process, that backup file will be uploaded to the website. So if I come back in here, hit F5 and cross anything not yet crossed, we can see that I've just added a new backup to this environment. And right now, this service has been around for 2 months. So at the moment, what you can do at this point is you can download the backups. We haven't built in the retention policy yet around that because we are very much kind of looking to iterate, build something that we think is potentially usable, talk to people who are interested in using it, and that's really the primary reason for this session here, which is to have that conversation, have that dialogue, see what people think, see whether this is something that looks like it's interesting. This isn't supposed to be a replacement for tape, but I think for people who maybe haven't yet got a credible off-site storage solution for their SQL Server backups, the people who sporadically remember to take a USB drive into work and copy the backups and take them off-site, nobody's laughing nervously when I mention that. I think for those people, this could be quite interesting. We've got some, so sort of in a nutshell, this is available now. There's no costs associated with this right now with any of this cloud storage. It will become a chargeable service at some stage because it costs us to put the data on S3. But right now, we're too early. We want to see whether this is valuable. We want to understand what we would need to build for people. So right now, we've got a number of customers who are already using it. The EAP, Early Access Program, is available. If you go to sqlbackup.red-gate.com, you can create an account, you download an installer, which we're continuing to improve that process, but basically it gives you that stored procedure that I talked about. And that stored procedure calls the SQL backup engine to create the backup and then does the file transfer up. You can then, as you've just seen I used a stored procedure call directly in T-SQL, but we're going to add this as a checkbox into SQL Backup in the user interface. That's all part of sort of ongoing project development work. And then once you've got your backups off-site and you've done this without having to invest in infrastructure around tape or tape drives, you haven't had to sign up with Iron Mountain for any service, with a 12-month minimum subscription period, you just signed up and used this capability, then what would you then do with the data? And kind of this is where we've got some thoughts on what might happen in the future. So you've got your backup data into the cloud. So if you need to do things like backup verification, do the restore, and then run dbcc check db on the backups. Right now, who's doing that sort of backup verification, and who isn't doing it? And nobody's going to put their hands up, but I can tell you that I know lots of people are not doing it.
We're not doing it, but would like to. It's just complicated.
So there's an element of it's complicated. Backup 7 was released to try to, the main focus of Backup 7 was to try to make that easier. But even so, I know talking to people, they say, hey, I've only got the one server. I'm in a hosting company. That server, it's too busy. I can't spin the backup there. And I'm not going to buy another server just to do backup verification. Stick it up in the cloud. And although this is not something we can do right now, this is something we're thinking of, which is, well, it's in the cloud. There's spin up a VM, restore the backup, verify the backup, and keep a track of your backups and know that they are in good shape. If you need to get to a particular backup, we've got all the metadata about which server, which database, when it was taken, what backup type. You need to do a point-in-time restore. We can find the set of files and do the point-in-time restore and produce all the information necessary to make that as easy as possible. So yes, you can do. You could do object restores just as you could do them for a normal restore. There's no sort of specific magic in here. Although one of the things that we could do is we could restore the backup and then into a VM and then turn off the VM. So there's no delay when you need to bring it back online. But this is all about things that we could do. So we're literally 2 months into this process, into the development of this. We've got to the point of an EAP which is usable. Please, if you're interested, actually, if you're interested or if you think this whole idea is lame and sucks, tick the box and tell us that you'd like to tell us that. Because it's just as useful, if not more useful, to hear that you think none of this is interesting, as it is to hear this is really interesting and this is what I would want from it.
Constantly shuffling stuff back and forth to make sure we don't fill them up. So have you thought about costing? And that would be the first question I would get asked, is how much does the service cost when we're backing up terabytes a day? Yeah,
so how much would it cost? It's certainly an important thing. So we think we've got some clever things we can do around, potentially around cost. So I believe, I'm not actively working on this, but I believe the storage system we're using, S3, supports deduplication. Now, whether they surface that to us or whether that's how Amazon makes a cost saving, I don't yet know. I haven't done that digging. But there might be that's one way in which costs will get managed. We would also look to sort of apply a retention policy here. So you'd upload your backups, and then you would have a retention policy applied so that, just like with tape, you would have aging. So you'd keep monthlies and weeklies and yearlies. But we'd need to one thing we want to do in our discussion is find out what retention policy people want. We could simulate the one you get for your tape, but you might think that one sucks. You might want a different one. And the costing is, there's another aspect of costing, which is also the file upload, the transfer of data in. Now, again, we think there's some things we can do to minimize that. There are protocols that so once you've got a backup there are protocols that can look at the fact the backup's already there and say, I only need to upload the changes. So there's things that we can do here to keep the cost down, because what we need this to become, if this is going to become valuable, is it's got to be cost effective. If it's 10 times the cost of tape. And then beyond, in terms of cost, you're aware, I've said that we're using S3, but Amazon have released another storage infrastructure called Glacier. Have you heard of that one? So it's cold storage, so it's has a real implication for recovery time objectives because it's much, much slower to get the data out, but it's literally 1/10 the cost of S3. Now, part of the sort of the backup managements that we've been talking about, purging old ones, might that also involve migrating older backups into Glacier and accepting that the RTO to get those older backups out of Glacier is going to be longer than it would be getting down from S3. That's all part of things that we might do in the future. So it's very interesting. Please tick the box. We'd love to talk to you and find out more.
There's just three things that I see initially looking at this.
Yep.
I think it's a great topic for small shop. Concerns would be around performance of getting your data up to the cloud, especially based on your location. I mean, if you're going to use S3 in a local area, that's going to be great. But if you're trying to move and back up into S3, which is on the East Coast, you might end up with problems. Compliance, which is obviously a concern for anyone managing social PCI data,
Yeah.
or PII information, which could be a concern, even though you've got the encryption there, which is pretty safe, but having data off-site and not managed by your company or at least almost 99 could be a concern. And the third thing is there's been a lot of visibility S3 outages and concern about being able to recover my data should it be up there in the cloud and S3 being down.
Yeah, no, I think they're all very credible points. I guess to a certain extent, if we think cloud is going to take off, some of those concerns, how do I fit in when I'm heavily regulated? How can I take advantage of cloud? And how can you give me more stability than currently you're showing? Are things that we're sort of taking a bet that people like Amazon and Microsoft need to make more robust and have a better proposition there. It would be very interesting if you have some thoughts specifically on the compliance regulations, the questions that you would ask of anybody offering a service like this, whether it's cloud or whether it's just an off-site data center. I'd be interested. Please tick the box. I'd love to find out what those requirements would be.
I'd have a hard time just handing over a copy of my database to somebody else, no matter what kind of protection is supposed to be on it.
Yep.
Because now it's no longer under my control.
I totally understand that, yeah. I think there'll be people who feel like that. I guess my question would be, if we feel like that today, do we think that in 5 years' time, we're all going to feel like that? Nothing will change.
What about send ASOS? Yeah, exactly. Those are the hands I know. Same thing. Yeah. It's often physical or not physical somewhere else. You're still giving up your data somewhere if you're off-site.
I'm particularly worried about handing the data over to somebody else. It'd be nice in my account to specify my S3 account rather than your S3 account. At that point, I'm still dependent on Amazon, or can I switch it out with Azure or Jungle Disk or something like that? But then it's still my account at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I
So
think that might go a long way towards compliance.
yeah. Okay. So that's great. Thank you. Please, everybody who made some comments, especially if you've got concerns, because we really want to know about those. Please tick the box. We'd love to talk to you. And all we're really asking is for the opportunity to phone you up and ask you a few questions. So I would be very appreciated. I've taken probably more than my time. I'll be around at the end. Please come and grab me if you want to chat further. I'm going to hand over to David. That was easy. There's only 2 Davids to hand over to. Thanks very much.
Hello. Is this working? Okay, who here uses SQL prompt? Okay. For some reason, people on the left of the room do. Oh, okay. Yeah. You would. Excellent. That's most of you. So, I've done that. So who uses the shared development models? This is where you've got one database for development, and every developer makes the change to that database. A couple of you, 3, 4. And dedicated, which is where you've got your own. Okay, so slightly more. Excellent. A bit of both. Okay, so it's equal split. Thanks. So if you're using shared especially, you'll have there is the possibility that you'll make a change and someone else makes a change to the same object. So you'll have conflicts. And of course, if you're using, if you're an application developer, that doesn't happen because you generally have your own checkouts, local checkouts in your working folders. And the conflicts do happen, but that's when you commit to source control. If you're using a shared database, obviously you don't have the benefit of that. Is that a concern to anybody, or is that at least 1, 2, 3, 4? Has it happened to anyone, or is it mainly something that, yes, it has, all the time? Which objects does it normally happen on? Is it still procedures or tables? Or? Procedures and views. And what's the consequence of this happening?
One of the developers has to get up and wander around the room and say, anybody know anything about why my change,
okay.
my report view didn't work or isn't there anymore?
Is it possible to recover from that situation? Is this saved somewhere, or is this view lost essentially? So does it have to be rewritten by the?
Well, we just recently started using SQL source control.
Okay.
It's a lot better now, but no, it used to be real hard. You had to just recreate it.
Okay. And are you using shared a database, or you are? So even with SQL source control, unless you've committed it to source control, you run the risk of overwriting someone else's change, because changes are only safe once in source control.
Sure. Two people change something and neither change has been committed yet, right?
Exactly. So it's not really source control only controls it once you put it in source control. Prior to that, and generally people will only commit things to source control once they're happy to share it or it's been tested.
Yeah.
But so there's that whole point before that situation where issues could happen. So what we're thinking of doing is implementing a feature in SQL prompt that is a team feature. So the idea is that if one developer makes a change to an object and another developer is making a change to an object on their machine, we alert the developers that this is happening. So we say, so-and-so, we can find out the name, we can find out what the object is, and we can possibly even show the changes that are being made by the developer at the time. And we're wondering whether this would be a valuable feature for SQL prompt. And is that something that people would find interesting? So let's see if I've got some screenshots. So this is the way it would work. It's probably quite small. I didn't realize the screen would be so small. But here, this just says alter procedure something at the top. And you would get some sort of thing that pops up. And the user experience hasn't been designed yet. So this is just an idea. That would be something like this. A SQL prompt notification. This object is currently being modified. View details. And this would just pop up for a few seconds. So you could quietly ignore it if it's not something that you think is important. If you click on view details, you get a change log for that object. So here we have when the object was last modified, who modified it, and a diff, depending on which one you've selected. So actually, let's go back to this one here. So the way we do this is because SQL Server has a default trace, and this trace has the information that is listed here. Well, it's got the information up here. This one we can query from some of the system tables. So we can poll this trace regularly and take this information and populate a database with these changes. And SQL prompt will know to look at this database, and if this database exists, because it's obviously something that you would optionally create, it would surface this information. So once you've got this database, there are other features that you can benefit from. So if you're, say, a DBA or team lead, and you want to just monitor the changes made to the entire database, maybe it's not just the changes that affect you that will conflict with your personal changes. Maybe you just want to know what happens. You could say, OK, I want to follow this whole database. And you'll get the notifications that pop up for all changes made to the database. Maybe you want just a subset, a schema. You want to follow that, or maybe you want to follow a particular person. A new starter comes in, you don't trust them so much. You want to say, I want to follow this particular person. Any change this person makes, pop up a little alert. So that's something that we could do. And as I said before, we haven't the way the alerts will come to the user, we don't know. That could be via email, via a little toast, which is the things that pop up from the notification area, or it could be something else. So this is the way the user might set it up. So here you've got the Object Explorer on the left-hand side. If you right-click there, you might find a new option, which is follow. and you can follow an object or follow the entire database. Once you've done that, you would just see it pop up something like that from the bottom right-hand side every time a change is made to that object or that database. And of course, that is pretty much exactly the same thing as you saw before. It tells you that this object has changed. And if you click on that, you get the same change log. So the fact that we have a change log means that if you do overwrite a change that you didn't, or someone else overwrites your change, you have a way of getting back to the previous version. So you can take historic versions. It's almost like the undo feature, so Control-Z that you get, Control-Z, sorry, that you get in Microsoft Office. So you can just backtrack. It doesn't even have to be someone else overwriting the change. You might overwrite your own perfectly good object with a new version that isn't as good as the previous one, and you might want to get back to that. So it could protect you against yourself. And this describes how it works. So we have a changelog database that gets created. SQL Prompt will probably offer you to do this at some point. Each user would be able to select which databases to enable the feature for. You might not want notifications for the entire server, so you would have to specify the database. Each instance of SQL Prompt running contributes to this database, so it will scan the default trace and populate this database with the information. And of course, if you have the SQL Prompt, it will just leverage the information in the log and alert team members of relevant changes. So that's how the feature works, and that was the last slide. So just want to get, yeah.
Okay, so is there a difference between them alerting you about the object you're currently editing and alerting you about objects that you say you want to follow?
There is a difference in terms of how it's set up. So the way I see it is that you might, when you make a change to an object, or when you script it as alter, for example, that might just under the hood set that object to be followed. So you'll be following that object so that you get notifications. So you so yes, I imagine when you're making the change yourself that you are expressing an interest in that object at that point, then it will automatically set the follow to be true. But of course, you can. So what I forgot to point out here is that we've got a little checkbox here. So if this does pop up, and in fact you're not interested, you just script it as alter to look at it, and you don't care about it, you could just uncheck this box if it does pop up, for example. So was there a reason you asked that question?
Yeah. I want to make sure it's easy to use.
Okay.
If I have to, I'm not going to remember to say I want to follow it
Yes.
every time I modify the procedure.
So when you modify the procedure, it will be followed automatically until such point that you decide that you no longer want to follow it. That's the thing we have in mind. But of course, if you have any other,
Will it stop following when I close that query?
would you want it to?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I'm no longer working on it, no longer editing.
Okay. But you could still be working on that feature that involves the object.
Well, what I'm most concerned about is that two people don't say that it's the same.
Okay. So we could put an option in there. One option could be when I've closed all query windows without objects, then stop following. So another thing we could do is if we could follow, we could alert users if they're changing objects that have dependencies on other objects. So if you're modifying a view and someone changes the table that the view is viewing, then you might want to get an alert there as well. So it's not just the same object. That's something we could do. Because SQL Prompt already has all this dependency information. So that's something we could do quite easily. Any other questions or comments? I mean, is it something we should do, or is there something else we should do in the tool?
The last part is most interesting. The first part of that is not overriding each other. It seems like that normally is just by checking stuff in and out of source control.
Yes.
But the part about dependent objects and being notified of views change.
Okay.
If you need something, that seems really useful.
So you see that as the more valuable part of this feature, not the conflict avoidance. Okay, that's interesting.
Would this also capture in the change log if, I work with ERP systems a lot, version to version, they'll change tables, and sometimes they'll forget to say which tables they changed.
Yep.
Would this keep track when they actually upgraded their tables? Would it record into your history their changes?
If they're making changes to a database that SQL Prompt is monitoring, then that will go in the default trace, and therefore, yes, you will get alerted to that. So you could, monitor, in theory, a production database. if you're happy for us to run queries against your default trace for that production database. And then it will notify you. There's Grant shaking his head there.
I understand you're saying, well, I only want it for a short period of time. But I think there's other options or other times where people would want it for a longer period of time. And I think you'd want to have the choice to be able to configure it either way.
Yeah. There was another question somewhere here. Oh, there are a few.
Just kind of had a comment because I'm in an environment where there are hundreds of databases and there are multiple teams working on various databases at any given point, and we just need notification of who's working on what. So we kind of have a more complicated issue with understanding what changed and who changed it.
Okay.
So just the notifications themselves
Yes.
Would be colossal for us.
Okay. So, so you want to know for a given database who's working on it currently. So we could potentially have a screen you could load up that gives you a list of the day's changes or the week's changes, and just show you everything in a list, maybe with some filter options.
Kind of we need the entire team aware of who's working on what.
And how would you want them to be alerted? Are these little toasts good enough for you, or would you want that to be
Some
exposed?
options, but that would definitely help. That might intimidate somebody, but
Okay.
some sort of log, and it'd be a sign-up type thing. You could subscribe to
Okay.
the notices, so that people in various roles could do whatever makes sense.
Okay.
It would be cool if you had the ability to have multiple notification types to be able to configure and say, okay, I want it to also email here,
Yep.
but I also want it to pop up.
Okay. Rob?
It seems like that in a shared database model, this is really elegant, but in a distinct model, there's also places where this could be really helpful. If it tied into SQL source control's history, then I could have a view that said, what changed by everyone else in their distinct model too.
Yes, definitely. So you want to try to avoid even the source control conflicts.
Yeah.
You want to avoid those where possible. So why not expose this for that case? And that's something we would look at. It's slightly harder because you're modifying different databases at that point. So we can't just look at the name and the server and create one. But because we have source control as a common thing, so we could do something there.
It also looks like there's going to be users that will open views just to look at it. I'm thinking of my CTO.
Yep.
He's going to pop in 20 times during the day to look at something random.
Yes.
And I'm going to get a toast every time saying, hey, guess what? There's a tweet about somebody eating a burger. I'm going to eventually block him, and then when he actually does something dangerous, I'm not going to know.
Okay. Well, we might not just do it when they script as alter. We might wait until they've actually changed.
Yeah.
So SQL prompt parses the SQL in the query window. So we could parse it, and if it looks the same as the object that hasn't changed, we might not trigger an alert based on that. We might trigger an alert only once they made a small modification. Any last comments before I hand over? Yeah, that's a really good idea. So instead of alerts, someone could go in there and say, okay, what has changed? You could have both. Yeah, that's a really nice idea. Yeah, so...
SQL prompt have to be up and running all the time in order to capture the changes.
Yeah, okay, so V1, very possibly, because if any alternative would require some sort of server component, polling the default trace independent, which we could do, but the way I see it is that the V1 of this tool would be, yes, it would only start capturing this information when SQL prompt is loaded, which is when Management Studio is loaded. So, yeah, while it's not being loaded, the changes aren't being logged. So that would be a limitation of V1.
If I have SQL prompt and let's say I get a ticket comes into a general help desk line. So there could be 5 people seeing it. I start working on it. This is where the situation is help.
Yeah.
Trying to get on it. And if someone else doesn't have SQL prompt and they start altering it, will I still get the notification?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you will. Because they make a change to the database, and then that goes in the default trace, and your copy will register that. Okay. Exactly, yeah. Okay, I better hand over because we're running short of time. Anyone who's interested in this feature, please tick the box on the feedback form, and once we start developing this, we'll get in touch with you and just get your views on our proposed designs and so on and so forth. Right. Thank you. Right, who's next? David. So I'll switch it off.
Okay, are we good?
Great stuff.
So we have a product called SQL Monitor. Some of you may have used it already. I'm not going to talk much about the product, but if you're interested, if you haven't seen it, come and talk to me or one of the other people demoing it, and we'd be more than happy to show you through. But it does real-time monitoring. It brings alerts from a whole bunch of different servers. It captures a whole range of performance metrics so that you can look back at those over time, see how your servers are behaving, see if they're behaving normally or if there are some long-term trends that you should be concerned about. But in our experience so far, the majority of people aren't monitoring their databases. I'm going to ask you to, no need to be embarrassed here. I'm going to ask you to put up your hands. First of all, I'd like to see hands for anybody who's using a tool, a paid-for tool that they use to monitor their databases. Excellent. So that's 3 or 4. Great. And then people, put your hands up, please, if you're using sort of custom scripts that you've written yourself to monitor different things. Anybody doing that? Excellent. Can I ask what sort of things that you're doing with those scripts? What sort of things do you find out about? Sorry? Baselining. Yeah.
Baselining, blocking, alerting and blocking.
Uh-huh.
There's a bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but it's
Yeah.
also a tool.
Absolutely. Okay. And I guess a whole bunch of people, sometimes you'll get email alerts if things like jobs fail and stuff like that. Is that common for folks? Yep. Okay. And then if you're not doing any active monitoring at all, so if you wouldn't know when your SQL Server sort of spiked high on CPU or when you hit a whole bunch of deadlocks, anybody in that situation?
Well, I should just say that as a developer, I'm not in charge of monitoring.
Sure.
But there's still, I want to know which environment is tagged right now.
Yeah.
Choose another one.
And do the people responsible for the database, do they have that information?
We don't have that visibility, but we'd like it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are fine and attractive people because you're way skewed compared to everybody else out there. So we polled about this sort of stuff, and we find about 1/3 of people who are responding on places like SQL Server Central. So we're already talking about a more engaged and interested set of DBAs than exists sort of, out in the bad wide world. About 1/3 are using paid-for tools, about 1/3 are doing custom scripting, and 1/3 are doing nothing at all. And they find out that the database is in trouble when somebody phones them up to tell them that the database is in trouble. And that doesn't seem a good state of affairs for us. We think that monitoring... It's an amazing set of affairs for us, but it's something we'd like to affect. We think that sort of active monitoring that you guys are largely on top of, that's something that everybody should be doing in the same way that everybody should have their backup strategy in place. That, as a DBA, you should know before anybody else when the database is in trouble. Even better, when it's going to be in trouble so that you can intervene and deal with that before people get there. So what we've been thinking about is how we can get more people on board. And one of the things that we're aware of at the moment is that monitoring can feel like a fairly big sort of project to look into. If it's something you're not already doing, there are a whole bunch of different tools out there. And it takes quite a lot sometimes to get that installed on your environment and to get it going right. So we're trying to give people an easy way in to try this out and see the benefit without having to jump over those hurdles. So what we're going to do is we're going to take SQL Monitor, which is web-based at the moment, but normally installed on your own premise, on your own servers. And we're going to take as much of it as we can and host it in the cloud and just leave a small portion behind, which is the thing that's looking directly at the servers. The other thing we're going to do, which is kind of new for Redgate, is that instead of it being a license fee, we're going to charge a subscription. And the reason for that is partly that there are costs associated with us running this service, for which a subscription is a better way of representing them. But actually more so that for people who are not yet convinced of the benefit here, they can try it out, and if they don't find any benefit, they can cancel after a month, and they've not wasted a whole bunch of cash. And this is kind of how it works. There's not a whole lot here to explain. You have your on-premise side here with the servers you'd like to monitor. You have a Windows service, which is able to see those monitored servers. And this is where we query the DMVs, where we read the Windows performance counters from. That information is pushed up to our servers in the cloud. And that's where we then store it, actually, in a SQL Server repository, and where we host the web application so that you can look at that data. And from the cloud, we'll push out email alerts, and obviously you can reach the UI through a browser. So it's really just taking the product as it is at the moment and lifting a whole chunk of it up to the cloud. Can I ask, I should say, by the way, this doesn't mean that the on-premise version is going anywhere, and nor that we're going to stop feature development on the on-premise version. These products are going to end up so close that actually any features that we develop should just naturally flow into both sides. So this is sort of just a different way of purchasing and running the product. So I'm interested in, I realize many of you are in the position where you probably don't have a need for this right now, although I'd be interested in if you feel otherwise and if you feel this would better fit. But I'm interested in how it would feel to you to have your monitoring data up in the cloud. We talked a little earlier about having your backups there. Please, yeah.
For me, I would like it quite a bit. The functionality that I would like to have in it is to be able to control who has access to see what's going on in different servers. So you have
Yeah.
maybe a super admin, admin, and some other maybe individual that's like even in a department level.
Sure.
Someone on the business side who is in charge of the call center or the ordering system, they would like to see some real live data on what's going on with the database, because
Yeah.
sometimes even just how they allocate people might depend on how much the system can handle it. Some of these are under heavy load.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have this different granularity of data that gets surfaced to different types of people.
Okay. And so you mentioned having that sort of partitioned by servers or groups of servers.
Yeah,
And there's
the people that, right, so you have different servers you're monitoring. I can group those up to different types and then
yeah.
have different people that have access to see different groups.
And I guess there's another obvious axis in terms of sort of basically sort of read-only access to the data versus the ability to clear the alerts and things like that.
Right, exactly. Your admins or
Yeah.
supervisors.
Are there any other ways that you'd like to see that sort of access partitioned?
I'm offhand, that's what we thought of.
Cool.
What
Yeah.
we were talking to. And that's where I think the cloud adds that really helps out.
Excellent.
Because then you just give it a link and an ID.
Okay. Thank you.
What kind of performance would you have going to the cloud versus if you're doing the monitoring like you currently do?
Sure. So what we're doing at the moment is SQL Monitor measures some of the more frequently changing metrics every 15 seconds. For the time being, we've backed off to do that every minute. So that pretty much takes care of any bandwidth concerns, any processing concerns, and that leaves it fairly snappy. And there are only a few places, I think, where that difference between every 15 seconds and every minute matters, although there are some places. Yes, please.
As with everything that goes up to the cloud, security is a huge concern.
Yeah.
Having my server names, database names, depending on the information you're getting from DMVs, query information and text,
Yeah.
potential data being stored up there, security is a huge concern.
Sure. And which of those things, are those all equally important to you, or how would you rank that set of concerns?
Server names is obviously your cat vector type stuff along with database names. Queries, that is probably the biggest concern.
Yeah.
Because people will know and understand your objects. They can figure out from there how your objects are related. And you might even have relevant information as regards customers. Someone wants to do a lookup for a customer. You could then have customer information sitting in a DMV that you've got uploaded to the cloud, which, security for that is only as strong as the weakest person in your organization.
Yes, yeah. Okay. And for you, does that mean that this is something that you just would never consider? Or do you think, so one thing, for instance, we could do is obfuscate the server names. That obviously then creates a problem with you being able to work out which servers are having the trouble. So finding a way for that to be reversible or give them code names or something, I don't know. But, or is it just for you, this is not a solution that you'd go for?
For me, I'm not sure. So, I mean, one of the things you could help is also mitigate the fact that you could some way federate Active Directory and tie that access into the cloud into your company's Active Directory infrastructure.
Sure, yeah.
It would make it a lot more secure.
Yeah. So you'd have that confidence that when you killed off credentials on your side, that killed off access on our side and so on.
Right, and also being able to lock the website down for your particular environment to a certain IP range, for example.
Yeah.
Just to really help enhance that security model.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Different, especially when it comes to information security teams, they get really paranoid about that sort of thing.
Sure.
So you've really got to, give them the trust.
Yeah. So I think you had similar concerns, right?
I'm not the DBA, so I wouldn't be making the decision, but I don't trust the cloud. I would never use it.
Yeah.
I would never use anything that puts my data in the cloud.
Sure. I understand that. And I think that's partly why this is something which we think is interesting. And we think may be a long-term trend that actually this kind of software may increasingly be heading as something as John mentioned in the keynote this morning, as sort of where people shouldn't be concerned with having to look after the infrastructure, having to operate the service which is doing the monitoring of the servers they really care about. But at the same time, I recognize that some people are in industries where actually they just can't think about doing this. And others reasonably have concerns about it. And so the on-premise version is not going to go away. That's going to be the option as well. So at the back, please, sir.
Cloud and data topic. I noticed Azure's not there. Is that just the lack of support of VMDs now, or the way you're?
Yeah, so our monitoring, first and foremost, reaches out to the Windows performance counters. And depending on how you're using Azure, those aren't available. And so to begin with, and again, first version, we're pitching towards the on-premise service. Sorry, so here, yeah.
We're an IT shop of two. Concern is ease of implementation.
Yes. So this is perfect. So the experience here will be you go to the website, you create yourself an account, an email and a password. You download the Windows Service installer, which is like 15 meg or something at the moment. Downloads pretty quickly. You run the installer. You just go straight through that, and then the web page starts working behind you. So our aim is that people should be up and monitoring within 3 minutes of hitting the site, and that's what we're sort of testing against now.
Just a couple of things. Assuming that you can do more than using a password for security,
Yeah.
you have to have location inside there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, I'm assuming you can do multiple services across different organizations all to the same account.
Do you know, that's something we've talked about quite a bit. It won't be there in the first version, and we're just sort of about to be rolling into beta now.
So we have hundreds of customers, all with large databases.
Yeah.
And so if we can't do that, then it's not valuable. But if you could do
Sure.
that, and you had the secure side of it, and you didn't bring up data, you only brought up database objects for reporting,
Uh-huh.
then that would be valuable.
And are you a consultant, sir?
No, I'm
You're-
kind of in a deployment scenario with our company.
Okay, cool.
Supports and deployment.
So we've spoken to quite a few consultants, actually, who get very excited about this idea, particularly if they can have access from numerous sites, or people with sort of larger organizations. Sorry, so yeah?
The thing, too, is to be able to configure what you're monitoring on there, because there's so many things like the one I use that I really wouldn't like to put it up on the cloud.
Yes.
There's parts of it that I would, that more better information for management and upgrade, performance tuning, whatever you do. So that
Yeah.
able to filter what would be stored up there would be
And can you give me an example of the sort of information you'd be happy with versus?
query tags, right?
Yeah.
You just really want to know what, for someone like, in depth, but if you're talking about management and alerts of performance, you don't need that data in the cloud. You just
Absolutely.
need the roll-up of it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Instead of the details of it.
Thank you. And so,
The ease of deployment solves a huge problem for us. I don't want to be a DBA. I don't want to be into owning a product and administrating a product. I just want to have the performance data.
yes. Yeah.
And really the key part is getting, in most shops that I've been in, it's operations are responsible for monitoring and developers are responsible for new features.
Yes.
And so if we have a problem, getting them interested in the problem is the hardest part.
Mm.
And if they have access to the data,
And being able to point them to the page where you can see the problem.
more than just, they're not interested in CTUs,
Yes.
They don't know what to do when they say, well, high memory, I don't know the server.
Yeah.
But it also depends on what the reporting is coming out of it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to wind up there because otherwise I'm leaving no time at all for the things that remain. Please do indicate on the sheets if you're interested in talking some more or put some questions on the back. We'd love to hear from you. Or come and chat to me at the end. Thank you.
Right, on to Deployment Manager. So everyone here presumably was at the keynote, so you saw the demo Mike gave, so hopefully we'll be able to go through this quite quickly because we are running short of time. So manual deployments, they're problematic because they're time-consuming, unreliable, stressful, single point of responsibility, and opaque. So we've come up with a tool called Deployment Manager, and this was released last week. And this provides a user interface, a management interface, where you have the projects on the left-hand side. So you could have different development efforts here. And then you have the environments listed along the top. So here we've got development, test, staging, production. And you can see exactly which release you have on each environment. And it's very easy to move from one environment to another. And it provides visibility. You can deploy ASP.NET, Windows services. SQL Server databases is what we're working on at the moment. It means you don't have to write and maintain scripts. And if you do want to do anything slightly different to what you get out of the box, you can write some PowerShell, and that goes into the package, and that gets deployed as well. So it's fully configurable in that sense. So what we really want you to do is when you fill up the feedback forms, is we've got these 4 different things that we could focus on. So databases, transient environments, immune system, and publish without continuous integration required. And we just want to get a feel for how important these are to you. So database deployment. So migration support, that's allowing you to put custom migration scripts into the deployment logic. At the moment, SQL compare can be used to diff 2 databases, and it can provide a script that goes from one to the other. Migration scripts is a feature that we've added recently to allow you to customize certain aspects of that. So if you're, let's say, splitting a column, then you need to put in the logic of how to split that. Transit environments, that's more about managing the configuration for you. So you might have IIS configuration. At the moment, we don't deal with that for you, so it's up to you to configure that in your different environments. Should we be managing that for you? And obviously, that could eventually go to the cloud. Immune system, once you've deployed it, should we be doing any validation on that? Or is it OK that we've deployed it, and now it's up to you to use maybe something like SQL Monitor to monitor it and find out from your users whether it's working? Or should we put in some functionality to validate that it's deployed successfully and you're getting the value that you expected? And if you're not, we could have some sort of automatic rollback feature that puts you back to the previous good version. And the current implementation requires you to have an automated process to build the packages that Deployment Manager consumes from source control. So this will take, who here has a continuous integration server? So who here doesn't have a continuous integration server? OK, so that's the majority. So I'm guessing if you guys want to use Deployment Manager to manage your changes, you'll presumably want to do so without having to adopt a continuous integration server. So that's what that is at the bottom. So we could put in add-ins to Management Studio and Visual Studio that let you create these packages for deployment and publish them directly to Deployment Manager. So that was very quick, and that was me talking. Have you got any questions about this? And OK.
I saw the guy in the previous room make a change and then roll back.
Yep.
And I deal with this issue with my own job.
Okay.
If a change involves a migration script,
Yep.
and you want to roll that back,
Yep.
it doesn't know how to just automatically generate a reverse migration script, does it?
No, it doesn't. It could guess by doing a comparison and running SQL compare on it, but that would be risky because that might not, in fact, be.
That's exactly what we want migration script to do because we know that that won't work going forward.
Exactly.
Going backwards.
How important is that? Would you want to have to create a reverse migration script for each forward migration script that you write? Or would you be happier with it telling you, okay, we think something's gone wrong, sort it out yourself, because...
At our company, we made the decision that if we're rolling back to a previous version, that our automated tool will not do that. Some person has to fire up SQL compare and do the rolling back.
Okay. Is that because you would never trust a technology to roll it back, or you would never think that that was sufficiently tested?
I don't see any support for that right now.
Okay. Would you want support? How important would it be? Or is this okay? I mean, does that happen frequently enough for you to want functionality to be built into a tool?
No, we haven't done automated database deployments long enough yet.
Okay.
No.
Okay. There was another question from back. Okay.
It's, this, again, a lot of things come down to security. In small shops, people have access to the everything, but in a large shop, I don't have access to the IIS servers and insurance normally unless they have touch my databases.
Okay.
So automated deployment, that's like all everything in IIS and database changes, that's just not going to happen.
Okay. Would it be possible if we could configure this so that you have different roles within the system, so that different people could deploy to different environments? Would that help?
That would probably help.
Okay, that's something that we will be adding to the tool. I don't know how frequently. How soon we'll be doing it. Do we have any idea? It's on the list. But do write that down on the form, please.
We've been developing something like this in-house, and we've configured it so that certain people can define what the environments are, certain other people can define what the projects are, and certain other people can request deployment.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Thanks.
What component of, so deployment is one thing and saying it's successful is one thing. How much can we configure it that we can have validation post the deployment that further validates success?
What sort of validation would you be looking for?
Beyond just non-error deployment, actually running some scripts that check records or existence of fields or whatever, running some scripts that if it comes back true, it's good, and false, it didn't, and then being able to enact rollback on that.
Okay. I guess, I don't know whether that'd be possible to put in the PowerShell script, or whether you can trigger rollback. Possibly not at the moment.
There are scripts that run after deployment, and you could trigger running tests on that, and then you could fail the script, and then you could say that deployment has failed. That then follows into the automatic rollback that we were talking about before, and how you handle that in complicated cases.
Part of our testing our deployment is testing validation and testing rollback, enacting all those scenarios before we go to production.
Yeah.
That would be key to saying it actually is ready.
That's useful. I mean, one of the longer-term development things we're always going to be doing to deployment manager is adding new steps that make up part of the deployment. So at the moment, it's purely focused on shifting your packages to where they need to be and then deploying them. But we're talking about manual validation steps is another idea. So that's partly to address your security and reliability concerns. You could require a DBA to say, yes, this is fine, and actually push it live before I do it. That kind of thing, and testing would certainly be a step we could consider as well.
Yeah, we have actually run out of time, so I'm just going to give Colin a minute or two to cover storage encrypt.
So we are very nearly out of time, so I'm going to do this very quickly. SQL Storage Encrypt. So this is the least concrete, most abstract, most researchy of the things we've been talking about today. because it doesn't exist at all. With one slight caveat, because we already have a product called SQL Storage Compress. And it's not a focus of SQL in the City today, Deployment Manager, and things like hosted monitoring and cloud backup are sort of more the focus. But we've got a number of other products at Redgate, and a number of them are built on an engine called the Hyperback engine, which if you follow Redgate at all, you might be aware we acquired a few years ago. One of these products is called SQL Storage Compress. It lets you run a live database on compressed data files, and it works via a filter driver that's intercepting I/O and is handling the fact that the data is potentially compressed underneath or is even residing elsewhere in backup files as in another one of the Hyperback technology-based products called SQL Virtual Restore. Now, as a side effect, this engine was built initially to provide for compressed and encrypted backups. So it has encryption support, but that's it. In terms of it lets you run the data files on encryption, and it lets you have the data files not only just compressed, but compressed and encrypted, but that is the totality of the functionality around encryption support. And we believe that there are people out there who are looking to encrypt their databases, and we'd like to talk to you, basically. We'd like to know why you're looking to encrypt your databases. We want to know whether it's related to HIPAA and high-tech. We want to know what you would need beyond core encryption. Do you need specific capabilities around key management? What happens around, do you need to be able to re-encrypt the data with new keys in the future? Are there any other requirements that are specific to the thing that's driving your needs for encryption, whether it's regulatory or otherwise? So what we've got basically is core technology, but not yet a really rounded solution and a good understanding as to what might be needed by people. So it is the least progressed of the things we've talked about today. Please, if this sounds like it's something that's interesting to you, as I said at the start, we really want to have a conversation. Please tick the box if you'll be willing to spend 15 minutes on the phone with us at some stage just to talk a bit about what your interest is in this area. And because we're out of time, I'm just going to wrap up there. We are out of time. There's now a break. So if you do want to grab one of us, have a chat, please. I'm sure we'll all be happy to continue talking through the break now. One thing we also really wanted to do, we just didn't have enough time now, was to talk about things we haven't talked about. So what were the issues? What was it you turned up hoping you would see us talk about? What was the tool that you want Redgate to build that we haven't shown you right now, or the extension to an existing tool? So please, the two hands that have gone up, come and grab us at the front when we've wrapped up. Drop us an email. You've got our email addresses there. We're easy to find through Redgate's website, and we'll obviously be around for the rest of the day. And at lunchtime, some of the tables where we'll be sitting for lunch will have a slight focus, a focus on, so I'll be sitting on a table and hoping to talk to people about cloud backup and backup in general. David will also be on tables focusing on their particular areas. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. Please enjoy your break. And come and grab us if you still want to keep talking. We're very happy to talk and listen. Thanks very much. Thank you. Yeah. And please, if you haven't done so, please fill in the forms. Have to leave them on your seats or bring them to the front. Thanks a lot. Good. Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much.
Just some information about your